Welcome to the Kelowna Real Estate Podcast once again. Taylor, what's on your mind?
I am depressed as usual, Matt.
You've got some nice lights in the horizon, I think.
Not because I'm talking to you today, but I don't know. I just feel like the field goal is always changing.
Yeah.
Sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad, depending on your perspective, I guess. But a couple things to highlight, because we did speak about this in our show today, which was an amazing show.
Yeah. We got Peter Borszcz. Awesome show.
Yeah. Peter's a lawyer here in town, pretty heavy hitter, very good at large transactions in real estate and kind of mixing in business. So yeah, very well known and really good guy. So,
also great podcast returns.
Yeah. It was an awesome chat with him. But that's not why I'm depressed.
Yeah, that's one of the bright spots in Taylor's life.
Yeah. I'm frustrated with this assignment fee.
Yeah.
Like that flipping tax is essentially if you're buying a pre-construction condo and it doesn't close for a few years and you make a profit on it if you assign it before you close, or even when you close and then you essentially flip it, there's a tax on it. So why I'm frustrated with that is because this is how developers get projects off the ground in the first place, is by, I don't want to say fundraising capital, but basically selling a portion of the project.
They have to sell to get the financing. They have to hit their sales goals to get the financing to even make the project go forward.
To get their construction financing. Yeah.
And we need more houses. So we should be incentivizing any part of the market. It should be the pre-sales that are building more houses.
Yeah. And we're not saying like, okay, yeah, we don't love like flipping these assignments to make a massive profit, which doesn't really happen so much anymore. Years ago it did, but now most of these projects, you need to put 20% down. So it limits a lot of people. It's not an investment where you're going to be making a massive amount of money, but it limits people's exit strategies.
Yeah.
So if somebody buys this and the project's delayed by a year and a half, and they want to buy a different house, like I know there's exemptions for it, but it reduces people's confidence to buy these projects in the first place, which reduces capital for developers to use to get construction financing, which is going to limit the amount of units that come on the market, which is going to screw affordable housing.
Yeah.
So they're just like, they're coming out with these laws without thinking about it.
The assignment one, honestly, I feel like we need to talk about this now so that can maybe get changed, because yes, people are speculating and can make money on assignments, but like they're not taking a unit, because this is not a unit that's built. This is in the future. You are funding future houses being built.
Yeah.
So why would we take away the incentive to do that? I feel like there should be incentive to do that, not do that.
Exactly. There's already an assignment fee usually from the developer. So people aren't really incentivized to buy these to flip them. It's a strategy that was used maybe 10, 15 years ago, but they're coming out with these laws like way too late. And in addition to that, so we did speak about something else in the podcast and I'll highlight it a little bit more. So I was referring to Scott Butler. He's a developer. Don't know him personally. Would love to have him on the show. But just off of his LinkedIn posts, he says on a $400,000 condo, it's in the neighborhood of $100,000 in tax that developers pay. So private businesses built just over 250,000 houses in Canada last year. Some simple math says that's over $7.3 billion in tax revenue those private developers would have paid to the government versus the Housing Accelerator Fund of $4 billion. So what I'm getting at here is like the government's coming out with these headlines like, hey, we have this Housing Accelerator Fund of $4 billion and we're trying to help out housing affordability. Meanwhile, they're collecting $7.3 billion from developers that are actually the ones that are trying to build these units that we desperately need. So where's the extra $3 billion deficit gone to? Like, don't come out as the good guy if you're not.
Well, I guess you could just make it $4 billion less in taxes and it would have the same effect, paid directly to the developers to build more. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. The whole point of this is like, luckily I'm not a developer, but like if I was, I would probably quit at this point. With these regulations coming in, the volatility that they're infusing is just insane.
Okay, I have to talk about this. I was going to wait till another episode, but I just had to bring it up now. I feel like this conversation has just set me up too perfectly. Beck and I have been talking about putting a basement suite in our house, right? We have a perfect house. We don't really use the basement that much. Put a suite in. So we've noticed that BC had this secondary suite incentive to build your house. It's a $40,000 forgivable loan. They'll pay up to half of your renovation to make a legal suite in your house. Give you a forgivable loan up to $40,000. Then I was looking at the terms and there's an income maximum. So you have to make under $209,000 per your household to qualify to add a suite into your home to get this incentive. And I just thought, why does it matter what the household income is for the suite? Like the goal should be to build more housing. What possible factor does the income of the person building the house have to do with that? right? It just doesn't make any sense. And then when I was talking to you, Taylor, before this, you're like, well, that only really affects T4 employees, because you could be like a major developer with 15 buildings in Kelowna, but they're all owned in LLCs, and you do your taxes and making 90 grand a year. You could qualify, but if you're like a police officer or like a teacher and your household happens to make over that, you can't qualify.
Yeah.
The goal should be to build more houses. Why is the income of the person even relevant?
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of funny.
It seems like a very simple strategy. Put more houses, units available.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who's making money off of it, really. Just like, let's build some units.
Yeah, let's get some units built.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that we need more housing.
That's unfortunate. I was really looking forward to renting your basement out.
Yeah. I don't know, man. We're very strict on the tenants we choose. So I don't know if you pass the bar. Yeah. But you have good news.
I am stoked on this. This lifted me up.
Yeah.
So Airbnb legislation, we all know, kind of is coming into play. From my hometown, West Kelowna, they came out and have the exemption on specific properties because their vacancy rate is outside of that threshold.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that actually plays out in terms of, asking for that exemption from the province.
Yeah.
But thank you, West Kelowna. Yes.
You know what's funny? I was thinking about this is that tourists are going to now be more in West Kelowna because they can't come to Kelowna on their Airbnb. So like, it's actually kind of nice for West Kelowna because they're going to have more of a spotlight now.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny because, well, it's not funny, but they're really penalizing some people that are in Kelowna, and then that opportunity just grows somewhere else. That's kind of the whole point of like, they need to stop trying to regulate a lot of these things and just let the market self-regulate, because you come out with this and now like those properties in West Kelowna probably just went up in value by $50,000 overnight, and the ones in Kelowna devalued. Like, how is that fair to anyone? Unless you're in West Kelowna, you're laughing.
You know what's funny is people are already going to West Kelowna to buy in WFN land because they could Airbnb. Now it's just all of West Kelowna. So WFN is probably like, oh, well.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny, but yeah. You got some friends on the council there too, so.
Yeah. And I mean, some more exciting news we're going to be having on. I don't want to give away too much, but we're getting into the political podcasting as well. So some pretty big names coming on, which we're excited for.
Yeah, our name is getting out there.
Some other exciting news, Matt.
Yeah. Speaking of our name getting out there.
Yeah.
Taylor and I are now officially professional podcasters. This podcast and every other podcast going forward is now sponsored by the best brokerage in town, Century 21 Assurance Realty. It really is the best brokerage in town. Like when I became an agent, I went and I interviewed every brokerage in town, as agents do. And you go meet all the owners, you meet all the managing brokers, and you pick your favorite one. And I landed on Century 21 and I have not looked back. It's been like the best experience of my life. Kind of the motto there is that as an agent, like you're in business on your own, but you're not alone, right? There's a team there. There's a marketing team. There's accessible managing brokers and Dean and Shirley. Max is awesome. Sit down with him. He'll make a whole business plan with you, do a personal assessments, help you focus on what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and just help you grow your business, because it can be a little bit tight right now. So my opinion, and it's an honest, genuine opinion, is that Century 21 Assurance Realty is the real deal and the best brokerage in town. So if you're an agent trying to get your business to the next level, I think you should give Max a shout. Go talk to him or talk to me. I love talking about it too.
Yeah. Definitely. They've been supporting us and we appreciate it
very much. So thank you. And let's do this.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show, Peter Borszcz.
Okay. Welcome to the show, Peter. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Nice to be here.
So yeah, we just like to connect you with our listener real quick. Kind of what's your perfect Friday look like? What makes you productive, and what do you do for fun leading into the weekend?
Well, I'm a big swimmer, for those people who don't know. So my perfect Friday probably starts with an hour long in the pool. I love to start a day that way, and then coffee with my dogs, and then off to the office. So that's kind of how I roll.
What are they, 50-meter lofts, sir?
50 meters on certain days of the week. So like that's Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Yeah.
And, 25 the rest of the time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I've never done the 50. I've done a lot of the 25, but I want to get there.
Yeah. Cross lake swim. That is a bucket list thing to do here in the Okanagan.
Yeah.
I was registered for COVID and I finally got to do it last year. So yeah, it was a good way to start the day.
Nice.
Cool. Yeah. And coffee, I got to ask, are you like a 1 cup of coffee kind of guy? Because I know we met a few weeks ago and you were not drinking coffee in the afternoon.
Yeah, basically by about 11 o'clock, I got to cut it off.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out my own strategy. I feel like I'm just running on coffee lately. So
yeah, so if we ask obscure questions, Taylor has a plan.
As you get older, the strategy changes. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Okay, well, let's dive straight into it. We want to be efficient with your time. You're a wealth of knowledge. So we want to utilize it. Short-term legislation that's happening May 1st. Property Rights Association, I think, are fundraising about $150,000 to pay legal fees to fight that. Mm-hmm. Is that going to do it? Like, is there a leg to stand on? Is it worth going down that avenue?
Well, first and foremost, you have to understand that the province of British Columbia has the constitutional authority to go ahead and make what rules it wants with respect to property, right? That is purely within its purview. And if it wants to regulate municipalities whose power is derived from the provinces, they can do that. So nothing the province has done kind of on the face of it is unconstitutional. Now, the question is, like, have you then had some sort of like de facto taking, kind of like an expropriation type of thing from these owners who kind of bought with the expectation? Well, you know, there's a whole bunch of body of law on like upzoning and downzoning. So, you know, does that argument have some kind of ability to succeed? Maybe if you found the right judge at the right time, but would I be investing in that? Like, if I was a gambling man, would I gamble on that? No.
Yeah.
Right. Like, my thought on that is I wouldn't be investing in that project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you get hired for that project? Would you be interested in fighting that? No,
absolutely not.
Yeah. Okay.
No, there's better uses of my time.
How much does a court care about public opinion on something like this? Would they even...
Zero.
Yeah, not at all?
Zero.
All right.
Yeah.
Right, because if the court cared about public opinion, like, it would just be a popularity contest, right? Murderer, guilty, innocent, I don't know.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So, yeah, I guess like the popularity comes the legislation itself.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that's the legislator's job, is to like, that's what the majority of the people want. So let's put that through. But, you know, the Constitution is there to protect the minority. And there's this balancing of rights that courts go through. But in this case, like, you have to look at it and say, well, you know, the province has a justifiable reason for making this legislation and putting on 16,000 units or something, did they say, back onto the market. So, you know, they're trying to address what is a real problem. So it's going to be hard for the courts to say that there isn't a valid legislative reason for that to exist. And short-term rentals are fairly new to the legal landscape. You got to remember, law moves really slowly.
Yeah.
So like Airbnb and VRBO, like, they're creatures of the last decade.
Yeah. I think I looked into this. I think it was 2009 or 10 that they came in. So like, yeah. Brand new.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I would be surprised if the court did anything that fundamentally altered the legislation as it exists.
And for, I guess, developers or developments that are going on, or people that are in contracts that haven't closed yet, I mean, most of the disclosure statements, I believe, basically state that it's out of their hands, then it's not an issue that they can worry about. Is that kind of the stance, is just stay the course, you've got to close on the property and developers have to finish their projects and we're all just kind of stuck in this together?
I think that's going to be the de facto stance for most people. I think there are projects out there that if they are really a hotel, but they started as a strata, they could be a strata hotel. Like, there is room in the legislation to say, and you look at these places like Playa del Sol, Walnut Beach down in Souyuz, where they are stratified hotels. That's the way that they operate. They have reservation systems. And, you know, Big White has lots of examples of this as well. But, you know, in the areas where this is going to apply, those are a couple of good ones. So does a new development actually move in that direction? Do they change? Really, what you have to change is the owner's ability to possess and use the unit exclusively. If you take that away from the owner and say, now there's a rental management covenant here and rental management bylaws, and like the Cove, we're going to be monitoring who goes in and out, then you have the ability to kind of change what you are, and now you are a hotel, and now you can have your short-term rentals. But that's going to change your property management. That's going to change your economics.
And wouldn't doing something like that, wouldn't they have to do a new disclosure statement at that point? And then at that point, you could just say...
Absolutely, because now you're introducing things in the strata bylaws and in title that weren't originally there.
Yeah.
And does that constitute, and this would be for a judge to decide, does it actually constitute a fundamental change giving rise to a new right of...
Yeah.
Well, then you need everyone on board too, right? Or whatever the percentage is. It's not like every owner is going to want to say, okay, I don't want any part of this and just give it over to a management company.
Well, remember that a developer, before they file that strata plan, can make whatever changes to the bylaws they want, subject to the REDMA fundamental change right of rescission type of mechanism. Now, after we have owners in there, if we're talking about an existing building that's already, you know, functional and full of owners, yeah, absolutely. Then the ownership group itself is going to have to vote to make a change, and you're going to have voting thresholds to do that.
Mm-hmm. seamless segue, if I may say. So then going into lease land, you're allowed to still run short-term rentals on lease lands. Do you see that ever changing? Or, the owners of the lease land, West Bank First Nations, are they looking at this like this is a great opportunity for them to build those type of properties?
I think different First Nations are going to take different approaches to it depending on where they're located. So if you look at West Bank in particular, that ability to say, hey, we're going to allow short-term rentals on our lands because we're not subject to the provincial authority, that makes a lot of sense for them. But if you look at another band like Tawasin, maybe not, right? Like they're going to have their own housing issues. So I think it's going to be very First Nation specific. And the government has crafted the legislation such that the First Nations could opt in if they wanted to, right? Much like smaller municipalities, they can opt in if they want to.
But then it would go back to the political arena where they could just decide that they don't want to do that if they don't like it in the future, right? Like the First Nations. If they say, yes, right now I want to have short-term rentals, they might not always want that.
That was kind of my leading question is, okay, what is the risk of buying on lease land right now? Like if somebody sees an opportunity, there's no committed confirmation from West Bank First Nations that this is going to last indefinitely.
Well, one of the generalized risks of buying on leased land ever, this is always a risk, is that you don't elect your governors, right? Your governor is band in council of the particular First Nation upon whose land you are leasing. And, it's not like municipal council or the provincial government. You don't elect those people. Those people are elected by band members unless you are a band member. So they can make whatever land use decisions that they want to make. West Bank in particular is a self-governing band. So, they have certain autonomy from the federal government to do what they wish. So those risks exist anyways. So you could end up with something, and I'm just looking at like the Burn Co site, for instance, right? Like you could end up with like, semi-industrial land right next door to residential land. That can happen. You can end up with really tall retaining walls that are just there. And you're like, okay, well, how did that happen? That's within the band's authority to do that. So I think that's just generalized risk when you were to enter onto First Nations property.
Yeah. Like, is that why the values of lease land is slightly lower? Like, I know we're just talking about this off air a little bit, but there are lenders, but it's not like you have an abundant amount of lenders that are willing to go into mortgages on lease land. And if they do, there's some stipulations, like the lease has to be prepaid. It's not going to be amortized monthly, or, it has to be the duration of the amortization. Like you can't have a lease up for renewal in 5 years, like, or the equity has to be there. So they just protect themselves, I guess. But are lenders just incredibly intelligent and they know that there's more risk, and like people are actively, because we're kind of in a pocket, right? And like the Okanagan has, I don't know the percentage, but a absolute ton of lease land when you're looking at across Canada. So it just seems more the norm for us. But if somebody else was buying on lease land, like as a lawyer, when you're reviewing it with them, do you kind of acknowledge like, hey, there is a small risk here that you should just be aware of?
The lease really depends on the particular development you're buying into. So they are all very, very, very different. Unlike, you buy a subdivided parcel with a home on it in Sicamous versus one in Kelowna, they're going to look nearly identical if they're on fee simple land. But if you buy on a subdivided leased parcel on Little Shuswap Indian Band versus a subdivided leasehold parcel on West Bank First Nations, they are fundamentally different things in terms of whether that lease is prepaid or not, how long the term is, what the band's options are at the end of that lease, or what the band usually does at the end of that lease, whether there's title insurance available, whether there's a lender available, whether that lease gives the lender the right to foreclose on that lease, right? They are completely different legal animals because your property rights are determined by the lease document itself. And so whenever you buy in lease land, you're kind of getting to know that property just in and of itself. You can't generalize and say, well, I bought in Sonoma Pines, so when I go down and I buy in Spirit Ridge and Osoyoos, it's going to be the same.
Yeah.
But they're completely different. Two great developments, by the way, but completely different. So it's just something to bear in mind. And I think that lenders want to have policy, and they want to be able to really look at what they're lending on. And I think that's why you see variability in those lenders. Those lenders that have taken the time to examine and get comfortable with the development are going to lend in it, versus lenders that, like they may not have the time or the capacity to assess their risk. So it's really easy to go to the lowest common denominator and say, we're not taking any risk.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So the reason why we're talking about all this is because of affordability. Obviously, I don't expect you to answer this whole question, but I've heard you talk about this before about like your take on affordability is reducing red tape. Mm-hmm. Like, what are your thoughts on this thing? It sounds like that's the route that you would go.
Well, it's not just my opinion. BCRA published on this as well. You go back to kind of look at what Auckland has done and said, okay, if we had reduced the bureaucratic burden to get projects done, we get more projects done and we increase housing supply. Yeah. And there's some really good evidence that that's a good thing. Short of being like a benevolent dictator and being able to just say, I'm going to fix the problem, which, I don't know if I would sign up for that job, but
I've heard a few people that would.
Yeah. Short of having that kind of power, you're working with all these various levels of government, and it's not just government, but it's also different ministries, different utilities. Like, you think of everything that goes into getting a project of even modest size off the ground, there's a ton of hoops to jump through. A recent example that is a little bit of burning a bee in my bonnet, I guess you could say, it has to do with fires. And, you look at the time to issue demolition permits between RDCO and District of West Kelowna.
Yeah.
District of West Kelowna, for some reason, couldn't get their head around trying to issue demo permits to people that had their house burned down. RDCO got it done pretty quick. I would like some sort of explanation as to why there is a fundamental difference between those, like, same area, same disaster.
Yeah.
And these are people that we should really actively be helping as a community and saying, like, look, we want you to be like, here's a whole bunch of free insurance money that's going to come into our region, that's going to, help all the trades out, get everybody building, facilitate economy, all that stuff that we want. So why can't we get them a demo permit at the same speed that RDCO did? And I'm not saying don't do your job, because like RDCO clearly is doing the exact same job as the City of West Kelowna.
Yeah.
But it took City of West Kelowna, in a lot of cases that I know about, 2 to 3 times as long.
That's actually a great point. My mechanical guy is down West Side Road, RDCO, and like I saw him 2 months ago. It was just before Christmas, and he lost his house. I was like, "Hey, Mark, how's it going, man? Like, how are things?" He's like, "Yeah, we're going to be pouring foundation pretty quick." I was like, "What? Like, how do you even get that done?" And then meanwhile, there's other people in West Kelowna that are like, "I'm still living in an Airbnb because we can't even get our insurance done yet." Mm-hmm. Like, it's wild. So this is a tough question, but yeah, like, what would you do? What's the easiest red tape to remove? Is it like staffing to get those permitting done, or just, I know we've spoken about this before on the show, like we have these public hearings, everything's kind of done, and then when legislation comes out by the city or there's a new development that goes up, people oppose it, and then we're kind of back to these public hearings. What's kind of the easiest way to streamline some of that stuff?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of little things that you can do. Like, what does have to go to public hearing, what does not, should be defined and defined clearly. I think for lower end development, and I would say like everything under a fourplex, that should be a one-stop checklist shop with the municipality, right? We did that in Kelowna really successfully with the RU7 properties. Yeah. They're like, if you're building something that kind of looks like this on lots that kind of look like this, we're going to stamp that and you can go ahead and start building. That created a ton of housing.
Yeah.
So we just have to follow the models that we know work and do more of that. And it's not like reinventing the wheel. It's not rocket science. It's just, let's streamline those small projects, because if we can create, 4 units where there used to be 1, wonderful. I don't think anybody would like my benevolent dictator solution, which would be like, there's all those farms that are in the middle of Kelowna. I would just build a whole bunch of apartment buildings, Sim City style, like, boom, boom, boom.
That was actually going to be one of my questions. Like, okay, so we just have to preface, like, we're sorry, West Kelowna. We're like ALR, we're sorry, but fair point. And we've spoken about this before.
I've beaten this drum.
There is so much land around.
You show those places and you look at the fields across Springfield, and you're like, there is many pedestrians walking right past there. It's right by shopping, and it has been the home for geese for as long as I've lived here. It's insane. Yeah. It's insane that is like that still.
But I guess, but the question is then, like, why?
Like, why does the LR exist?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, I understand why, and like, I think there's a lot of positive things that come out of it, but can we not make some exceptions? Does it not make sense?
So for those people who don't know, ALR is all about food security.
Yes.
And BC being able to produce enough food to feed its own population, because of course there has been eras in the past where it's like, if we're very dependent on imports of food, we could be vulnerable as a population. So that's why the ALR exists. And I think it's a good, you want to plan for worst case scenarios sometimes. Absolutely. The hard part about BC is we're a bunch of islands, right? We're either islands surrounded by water or we're islands surrounded by mountains in the sense of unbuildable area surrounds a lot of British Columbia. Fly over this province. It's stunningly beautiful, but not a lot of places for people to live or crops to grow. So the ALR kind of makes sense in that context. But when we look at, how we facilitate housing for people and where people live, it's not just Kelowna. Like you drive, into Richmond. There's massive tracts of ALR land. And the ALR used to have a mechanism for land swap where they would say, all right, we will take land out of the ALR if you could provide better land somewhere else in the province that has, similar or better agricultural capacity. And so the ALR land swap rules provided an incentive for developers to go out and find a farm that wasn't in the ALR, fix it up, put on good soil, like literally truck it on, make this thing good to grow in all the ways and say, all right, I got 10 acres out in Falkland and I'm going to swap that in and I'm going to get out my 10 acres. I think it was 2-1, 5 acres. Back here in Kelowna. And so the ALR was good with that because okay, well, net gains all over the place. Then they said, no, you can't do that anymore. And they stopped that. And in kind of the era we're in, I'm wondering, well, maybe we should be able to do that in terms of doing those things again. So
do you know why they stopped?
Well, because people were doing it all the time.
Too often.
And they thought that it was resulting in a loss of agricultural capacity.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. There's just certain plots of land specifically that are in the center of Kelowna.
Well, you used to be able to also get out agricultural land if it was surrounded by an urban center. Right?
Okay.
Once it got surrounded, you could, again, make an application. Can't do that anymore.
Okay. That just makes sense to me, but...
It's just another example of additional bureaucracy standing in the way of good land development. And I don't think anybody wants to see, nobody wants to see a big windfall for a farmer who bought a piece of farm property. But similarly, I don't want to see the government, racking in tons of money into housing and the government to become a housing supplier, right? From my point of view, government involvement just makes things more expensive. It doesn't make things less expensive. So how do we facilitate less government, more supply should kind of be the focus all up and down the spectrum. And I think until government really kind of takes a step back in more ways than one, I think we're going to be facing a little bit of an uphill battle there.
Yeah. There was a developer. I would actually like to reach out to him at some stage and have him on. And his real simple math was for about a $400,000 unit, like a condo, they spend close to $100,000 worth of taxes, whether that's, tax on supplies or GST, et cetera. And he's like, if we could reduce that, that's a huge chunk off for affordability. So instead of giving $100,000 on every unit to the government and then have the government stop trying to implement these housing programs to then make housing affordability, the real simple solution is just, trim it off at the source.
It is interesting though, because the government could do things that are free. Like you said, the RU7 rezoning, which was super successful, but it was almost too limited that it made those houses super expensive.
Yeah.
They just need to apply that.
Exactly. If you did that everywhere, which I think that...
Well, they've done that now. Yeah. Essentially, right? With the MF1.
Yeah, the provincial for houses on every lot. It makes sense. Now we just need a reasonable interest rates to put that into work, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a pretty difficult task for a homeowner to take on. It's intimidating to say, right, so I own this, and I understand it'll be more like small-time developers, but as a homeowner to say, right, I own my $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 home, I'm going to tear it down and build a fourplex. It's a pretty daunting task for somebody to take on. So you're stuck kind of giving that back to developers who are going to want to make a margin on that, right? And if they're going to be taxed massively...
But that's from a developer's perspective, they have to run their business. I completely understand. And you look at how some developers have operated and it starts to make a lot of sense. This is why so many developers, they cluster towards the luxury market. And they cluster towards the luxury market because of the margins, and they need the margins because of the time involved in development. So the longer you have to hold a property, that you have to pay interest, when you're in for development permit applications, the longer you have to do that, the longer you have to hold that property, the more expensive it becomes for you as a developer, just on land cost alone. Yeah. So you have the developers that are around a lot. You look at everything that's gone up in downtown Kelowna. It's luxury development. And it's luxury development because that's where the margins support the long holding periods that are necessitated by all of the permit applications and assessments and archaeological and everything else that has to go into actually getting one of these things off the ground.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the other thing is like our expectations as Canadians are to have a large single family house that you can park your garage in. If our expectations and we shrunk our square footage and we didn't have quartz and granite and stainless, then yeah, like housing would be slightly more affordable.
Yeah. It's true though. When you go to like McKinley or Mission or all the new subdivisions, they're all like gigantic super luxury houses, and it just seems like it'd be really hard to build 3-bedroom 2-bathroom houses, which everybody wants. The economics aren't there.
Well, and when there's enough margin, because most of the not most, but a lot of the value's in the land, because you can build out, right? So who's going to want to buy a $400,000 piece of land and build a $300,000 structure on it?
Yeah,
like it doesn't make any sense for a developer.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It makes sense if you can get 4 units and you can get it done in 12 months.
Yeah, speed for sure.
Right. And where these guys tend to make money is where they can go from building to building to building to building to building.
Yeah.
And, you look at a great example of this being done really well in Kelowna, folks. It was either phase 1 or phase 2 at the Ponds. And this is back in 07, 08. They came in and built homes that were, at the time, I think $100,000 to $200,000 less than the average home price. These were small 2- and 3-bedroom laneway homes, and just went from one to the next one to the next one. And it was a great development for a time when, it was hard to build. That developer did a great job.
So where do you see Kelowna going then in the next 10, 15 years? Like density, are we going to get more towers? Are we going to get fourplexes, or like our single family homes? Are they going to grow obsolete because of affordability?
Well, City of Kelowna has already threatened to stop zoning single family, right? That was on the table, and then there was a big outcry, and so then that came off the table. I don't think it's good government to say that we're going to stop doing something. You have to do it one way. I think we need a variety of housing types. I think that's a good way to go. But, personally, I'm more of a fan of Paris than downtown Vancouver, right? Like, I think you can have a lovely city with mid-rise towers. That is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
But that's an aesthetic thing in terms of, what I would prefer. But, does it mean density? Yes, I think the right density in the right place makes sense. But density makes sense when you also have public transit that works. Right? We have a city where, how do you get around in the city without a car? Maybe there's going to be, autonomous robot cars soon, because that would really help Kelowna.
Yeah. Well, we got scooters now, right?
Yeah. Well, autonomous robot scooters would be great. Right? Yeah. That would help too. But I really think that Kelowna has grown so fast in a very short period of time. I'm one of the few people that were born here. So I remember this town at, I think it was 40 or 50,000 people. There's no Coquihalla. The airport has 2 gates that you just walk up to. Yeah. It was a very, very different feeling town then. And, of course, my grandparents remember it when there was a ferry that you took across the across the lake. That's what happened when they were here. So it was a very different feeling place. And you look at the growth from then to now, the growing pains aren't unexpected in that context. But nonetheless, everybody's here. Everybody's here to stay. So how do we now facilitate the right infrastructure in the right places to make it all happen without, I'm just going to say poor Sioux use here, like a 37% tax increase?
Yeah, that was crazy.
What is up with that? That's crazy.
Well, that's a water system, right? Like, that's a town who grew really fast, and, they don't have wells to support the people that are there, and the people need water, and it's a desert.
Yeah.
So you got to do what you got to do. So I understand the rock and a hard place. Without water, you don't have a town.
Yeah. You said something there, like the comparable of Paris. And there was a guy that wrote an article and did a video on it. And it was for North America. I think it was over 4 stories. You had to have 2 stairway, 2 emergency exits in North America. And he's like, every other country in the world, you can go up to 6 stories and you're allowed this 1 staircase, and it allows the architects to make like 3-bedroom units and more windows. And you started to watch this video of him describing it, and he made a lot of good points. And I guess it was, earlier in the 1900s, it was mostly because of, fire issues that we were having. But he said, now we've evolved. Our building materials are better. Our response from emergency responders are much faster. Like, we don't need to have those kind of limitations. So yeah, maybe we could turn this into Paris if we kind of revamped some of those bylaws.
Where would we put the Eiffel Tower?
Well, the other thing to consider is what you can actually build with, right? One of my favorite places to teach legal update is actually Prince George, because the licensees up there are awesome, by the way. So shout out to George guys if they're listening to this. But like engineered timber, you can build like 6, 7, 8 story buildings with engineered timber.
Yeah.
That, is great on the environment, supports local industry, all of that stuff. So yeah, I'd like to really look at that stuff and to say, well, we can do this a different way and to support, good medium density would be wonderful in this town.
Yeah. We should have started with this, but can you tell us a little bit about your business then? What, instead of just hammering you with like politics and how to save us, what's your normal transaction? Do you help on the residential, commercial?
Benevolent dictator, didn't I say that?
Yeah.
Reluctant.
The reluctant benevolent dictator.
Yeah. Listeners that are listening, who should be reaching out to you?
So I am one of the partners of Montgomery, Miles & Stone, a law firm here in Kelowna. I am a business and real estate lawyer. So all of my clients kind of meet at the intersection of business and real estate. So that means I do a lot of work with, winery owners and liquor store owners and dentists and, medical professionals and, of course, developers and people who are building real estate, industrial landowners, shopping center owners, kind of all comprise my portfolio of clients. So if, people are kind of at that intersection and that's what they're looking for, they have a business that involves a lot of land holdings, dealing with leases and covenants and utilities and those types of things. That's what I do. I don't do any litigation. So I'm not involved in any kind of like expropriation or, shareholder disputes or those types of things. I like to focus on the building aspect of things and not the tearing apart aspect.
Yeah. So how come you don't do litigation? It's because you just don't want to?
I don't have time.
Yeah.
I guess is the...
He's too busy podcasting.
That's our excuse. We can't get out.
Yeah. No, mostly because I don't have time and I much prefer the kind of the build it together type of thing.
Yeah.
I went to law school. I have a lot of friends who are lawyers. But this might come as a shock to most is that like the litigation process itself is extremely adversarial and extremely destructive and extremely expensive.
Yes.
Right? I don't know too many people who've gone through prolonged litigation that come out of it and say, oh, that was a complete, absolutely the best thing I ever did.
When can I do that again?
Yeah.
Like, and nobody's going to sign up for a second act. So, why do I want to be that guy?
Yeah.
Right. I would much rather be the guy that's like, oh, yeah, my lawyer helped me build that building there, or my lawyer helped me do that winery over there, or you're building stuff. And, I drive around town now. It's like, okay, you kind of have a legacy and you see that legacy in all the buildings that you've touched. And, sometimes it's little things like, oh, I just, realigned the highway over there. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But that's stuff that kind of means something as opposed to literally tearing stuff apart. And so just from a kind of a personal perspective, that's the stuff that it gets me up in the morning. It makes it fun to go to work and to do work. A lot of times my practice will touch on litigation in the sense of like one of my clients is coming back to me and there's having a dispute. So I'll kind of get involved in kind of the early stages of, the mean, nasty letters getting back and forth. And then I get quickly reminded, I'm like, don't like this.
I touched it. It was too hot. Bye.
And I'm like, no, you know what? I know people who really like this. And so let's let them, do the court application. We're blessed in this town that this is a desirable place to live. And we've gotten really good specialized counsel kind of in all areas. So, when somebody wants to fight the government, I know who to tap. When they want to fight each other, I know who to tap. When somebody wants to get divorced, I can tap that guy. Yeah. So just pass the baton and let them do that stuff. And I'll just stick to, building more wineries and growing more grapes.
Yeah. We need help with that right now, I think.
Oh, we really do. We really do. So I had a meeting with a bank manager yesterday, and they had just done their risk assessment on this. This is a bank manager in the Southern Okanagan, and they had just done a risk assessment on their portfolio, and it was bleak. It was really, really bleak. The hard thing in that industry is that, they're estimating somewhere between 80 to 90% crop loss. So when you look at that, it's not going to affect, thankfully for all of us who love wine, it's not going to affect next year's bottles.
Yeah.
But it'll affect the year after that's whites, and it'll affect the year after that's light reds, and the year after that's dark reds. So you look at that loss of supply and you think, okay, well, how is that going to affect some of these businesses? Well, for some of those, let's just call them the mom and pop wineries, and I have a few of them in my collection where they may only have one small winery of 7 acres or something.
Right? There's a lot like that.
That's somebody's dream retirement, folks, right? Like, and we talk about the intersection of land and business, but there's a lot of emotion tied up in land in that. That's another part of my job that I really like. So for that person, I'm assuming they have a diverse portfolio of wines. They're going to lose 30% of their income over the next 4 years. Right? That's going to be really hard. And unfortunately, this favors the big producers because they're going to be able to, pull from multiple wineries in multiple locations. They're going to be diversified from that risk. And they're going to be able to probably acquire some of those smaller producers at a discount now because they're going to have to sell. So, that's kind of the sad part for those of us that like, small, local, unique wines. And
I think that's a lot of us. One of the reasons why we even live here.
Yeah.
Right. So like before the cold snap hit and hurt the grapes, there was already a lot of wineries were already for sale. I think it was something like 25% of wineries were for sale.
Well, that's because it happened the year before, but just, it was a much lighter hit. It was about a 25% hit the year after. And I remember walking the vines with one of my favorite clients, and we were down in Okanagan Falls, and he was just counting his lucky stars because he had only lost about 10% of those vines. Much better than the 25% average. And so he was like, okay, we'll replant and see what happens. But now to lose 80 or 90. And the hard part is that those vines take 5 years to recover, folks.
Yeah.
So, see what happens.
It's so interesting because when you think of the winter we just had, it was kind of warm. It was warmer than average.
Yeah, it was.
We had one cold snap and it's just a little too cold. Kind of crazy to think about that. Yeah.
I think in April, there's an additional tax coming out on alcohol as well. So they're just getting hammered from both sides.
That's thanks to Alberta. You're talking about the Alberta thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not done yet, though. We still have a few punches left on that.
Yeah. So what's the difference between a notary and a lawyer? I mean, this is probably an easy one for you. When I speak with clients about it, I'm kind of like, a lawyer can give you legal advice. Notary is kind of signing off on the document. So why should somebody come to a lawyer when we're talking real estate transactions?
Well, in my view, it depends on what you're doing. It depends on kind of where you're at on kind of the type of advice that you're seeking. There's lots of notaries that can do a residential conveyance. That's kind of within, their kind of statutorily mandated things of what they can do. They can file land title documents. That's great. And I know a lot of notaries that I like to work with in that regard. They're very affable people. I think from a lawyer's perspective, and this kind of goes across the profession, is that you should get a lawyer that really focuses on the area that you need help on. And I think you heard me earlier in saying that, I'm not going to do family law. I'm not going to do any litigation, right? You really want a lawyer that focuses on that area. And that's not really necessarily a notary lawyer dynamic. You just want somebody who's really focused on your issue and your problem and has hopefully seen it before so they can help you out. It's kind of like choosing a doctor, right? Or a dentist, right? You wouldn't say, okay, I'd like my dentist to do a full mouth reconstruction when they've never done one before. Probably not, right? You want a guy that's like, okay, that's what I do. I do full mouth reconstruction. I'm the guy for you, or if you're a surgeon that's never done an appendectomy, maybe I'm finding someone else. I know it's simple surgery and you went to medical school.
Yeah.
But I want a guy who's been there before.
Yeah.
And I think that's true with every professional, whether we're talking accountants or engineers or anything else. You want a guy who has experience, or a gal who has experience in doing what you want. And so that's kind of the crux of it. So in terms of kind of the residential purchaser and the lawyer notary kind of game, from my perspective, it's who can you talk to and get really good advice right at the beginning of the transaction. Even with my residential clients, my rule of thumb for all the realtors that I work with is send the clients to talk to me as soon as they sign that contract. I don't care if subject removal is 3 weeks out, and I don't care if they don't actually remove subjects on it. I want to talk to them when they sign that contract so that they fully understand what's in that contract and what's on that title. And this is when I say we, I mean all the lawyers at my firm, MMS, who, real estate is a big focus area of ours. We go through that contract and that title with that client and make sure that they are completely comfortable with what they signed, the legal ramifications of what they've signed, because even if you sign a contract for subject conditions, there's still legal ramifications to it. You have a best efforts obligation, to kind of take that through. That's a recent Supreme Court case called Bassine that kind of overlaid that. the good faith doctrine of contractual performance. And so we take them through that so that they understand what they've signed. And then at the end of the day, they decide not to proceed with the transaction. For our firm case, there's no legal fees that are owed. We'll just see you on the next one.
I think that's so important to highlight because, like I see a lot of contracts, you write a lot of contracts, and it's subject.
I get this question on almost every client.
It's
like,
subject.
I don't talk to the lawyer because I don't want to pay them. Like,
well, yeah, and it's always subject to financing, subject to home inspection, subject to legal advice, and legal advice is normally a couple days after the contract sign. And I'm like, oh, so did you, like, who's your lawyer? Like, who should I be sending instructions to from the lender? Oh, I haven't picked one yet. I'm like, well, why'd you remove subjects on legal advice? Well, I mean, like, it's like, what are you doing? This is step one. So,
well, a great example of that, and it's a reported case. You can take a look at the pictures on RDCO, is 282 Raven Drive. It's the Elise and Sorensen case. And that's a great example because in that case, like the pool was like clearly in the middle of the property line and they went to court and the guy lost his pool.
Really?
Yeah. You can actually see it on the RDCO pictures. It's right there. It was a case that we talked about in Legal Update. And so that's a great example of where. You know,
sorry, what happened? The property line was literally in the middle of the pool?
Literally in the middle of, you could tell from the aerial photos.
Whoever put the pool in just said, fuck it, to permits and just went.
Well, whoever originally put the hedge in straight to the back of the property line, not knowing that the property line actually went like this. Yeah.
And so was the adjacent property line a different owner or RDCO?
And so the adjacent property line's pool went right here. And so City of Kelowna permitted that pool.
Oh, really?
There was multiple
I was like,
owners.
Litigation.
There was multiple owners that were intervening before the owners that finally litigated. And it wasn't until one of the owners wanted to actually put up a new fence and did a survey for the new fence that they found out, hey, look, it's going right there. So that's an example of a survey issue, which, you know, like the lawyer looks at the plan, but that's also partially, you know, the realtor saying, okay, does this plan look like the property? Because the realtor is the one that's walking through it. Yeah. And that's partially the homeowner too, in the sense of like, you know, does this property that you're seeing the overhead, does that match? Because the homeowner signs off on the plan when they come in to see us. Does that shape of the lot match your understanding of what you're buying? I know another great example, and I fixed this one for the lawyers out in Radium. This is a townhome development where we had 4-block townhomes, 5, 6, 7, 8 in a row. Okay. But when they issued the strata lot numbers, it was 5, 6, 7, 8, the opposite way.
Yeah. Perfect.
So for 20 years, folks, 20 years, strata lot 5 owned strata lot 8 and strata lot 8 owned strata lot 5. And it continued that way for almost 20 years and different owners. And then it wasn't until, thankfully, an astute lawyer out there kind of looked at it and had his client like say, well, this is north. Like, which way does your balcony face? And she's like, no, I'm supposed to buy that one. And it's like, well, that's not the one we're supposed to. And so there's this big issue. And that lawyer called me and said, Peter, how do we fix this problem? And so we got to fixing it and fixed it. But
so did everybody have to pay PTT on that? Or?
Yeah.
What?
Oh my God.
Yeah. Our province at its finest. That is not a PTT exemption. There is a PTT exemption for conveyance error, but PTT has clearly said, no, that doesn't count as conveyance error. So
I guess the other option is everybody could just move, which obviously never going to happen.
No. Save yourself 20 grand in tax and move your couch.
Like they're the same square footage, right? These are townhome units, but really easy kind of, you know, just swap. So, you know, things like that, like why is the lawyer important in the context of a transaction? Those are two really great examples of, all right, those are great things. From the realtor's perspective, we read your contract. So, you know, if you're buying a place at Big White and you forgot to mention GST, I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
And it is.
Lay it on me, man.
But it's way easier to fix that before we remove subject conditions. Let's talk about it then until after we remove subject conditions. And, oh, by the way, Mr. Realtor, you're now paying 5%. Right? We don't want that to happen. So it's helpful from the realtor's perspective. It's helpful from the client's perspective. Send it right away. If you don't proceed, there's no legal fees you have to pay. And any kind of LTSA fees, we just hold your file. And when you buy that next thing, your LTSA fees get billed on the next file, but there's no legal fees for the title review. And that's my policy. That's the policy of my partners. I know that's very, very similar to like other real estate specific lawyers in town. We're blessed here in the Valley to have a number of good real estate firms. I have a number of great colleagues and really appreciate them. So that's the right way to go. The worst thing you can do is remove subject conditions without actually doing your due diligence.
Or what about just writing wildly unconditional offers all the time, like a few years ago.
Well, I think that's what that whole rescission period was about, right?
Yeah.
Like they were worried about that, and they were worried about people getting burnt by that. So I was on the committee for that thing, right?
Yeah.
And they asked me, they're like, Peter, how long should this be? And I said, it should be 7 days, just like the new home one. Like, why don't we match them up so that there's some sort of rationale here, folks, between new housing and used housing? Because how come if you're buying new housing, you get 7 days, but if you're buying used housing, you get 3 days?
Yeah, it should be the other way around, if anything.
Makes no
It would make so much easier because of the counting, the weekends, and the stats is so confusing.
It makes no sense at all. So I was clearly overruled because they went to 3 days.
Yeah.
So, don't count on me to change government unless you want me to be your benevolent dictator.
But that's the title of this show now.
Credit to Dave Peel if you watch this. So it really should be the same. But in those 3 days, what do you do? Like, can you line up a home inspector? Maybe.
If the seller lets you in.
Will your financing be done? I don't know. How fast are you, Taylor? Do you have anything better tonight?
Yeah, exactly.
Financing in 3 days? Like, most of the time it takes 14 days, right? Yeah.
So not to get into the weeds here a bit, but there was another one with a title. I've seen this happen a few times. I want to ask you about it. With a building scheme or something like that says the roof has to be cedar shingles.
Oh, yeah.
Things like 20, 30 years, 40 years old.
Yeah.
Like, is that serious? Because I've sold a few of these where you look at the neighborhood and there is like one house with cedar shingles and all the rest have got.
So building schemes in British Columbia can say a lot of different things. There's one in the British properties in Vancouver that says that no Asian people can live there. I'm dead serious.
Whoa.
So just because a building scheme says something, and the British properties one is a good example of this, doesn't mean it's enforceable. Okay. In the interior of British Columbia, the ones that say that they have cedar shakes on it.
Yeah.
And this is my gut feeling, not a legal opinion, folks, but my gut feeling is good luck enforcing that one. Because we clearly have fire risk here.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually in Crawford, which was already burned down. Yeah.
Yeah. So we clearly have fire risk here. To say that would be enforceable would be very, very difficult. Now, the other thing with statutory building schemes is who enforces it.
Yeah.
The city has said, to me at least, many times, we don't enforce statutory building schemes. And the city's not a party to the statutory building scheme. The other parties to the statutory building scheme are your other neighbors. So whatever you do that's contrary to the statutory building scheme has to be so bad to piss your neighbors off that they're willing to throw down $40,000 or $50,000 to take you to Supreme Court. Okay, so what is that? That's probably not parking your boat in your driveway. Probably not. Okay. Though a lot of building schemes say, hey, if you park your boat in the driveway, that's contrary to building scheme. So they could, and then I have to tell clients this, they could, if they wanted to, really say something about it. But, I think it was the second home I owned here. I owned up in Smith Creek. There were boats everywhere. And it had, you can't park your boat in your driveway. But summertime came, everybody had a boat in their driveway. But what does get enforced? Well, what does get enforced is where you block somebody's view. You have seriously changed somebody's value. All right. Then they're taking you to Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And they will
affect the value more than 40 or 50 grand.
And they will enforce it. Yeah.
Yeah. Easy one to highlight is just down the street when Aqua Development was building the neighboring property. I forget him, but 50? He was fighting that. Obviously didn't win. Not to hold your feet to the fire, but what's your opinion on that?
You know what? That is one case I have not read. So, from that perspective, I can't really comment because I haven't dived into that one too much. Mm-hmm. From a non-legal point of view, that struck me as a waterfront landowner having a little bit of an NIMBY type of feeling. And so, but I did not dive into the legal rationale there. So, but clearly they're still building, so we know where it went.
Yeah. Okay, we got to wrap this up and get you going. If you could buy one property in the Okanagan in the next 12 months, what would it be?
One property, just one.
Yeah, you can buy more if you want. Sure.
Nobody's ever asked us if there's a...
Yeah, I like where your head's at there.
In the Okanagan, I think there's a lot of really great stuff to buy. In terms of kind of Kelowna area, I would be looking for, of course, like the older housing that is that RU7. We can put a fourplex on it. Mid-rise type of stuff. I think that stuff has great potential here. So that's still all the stuff in Kelowna North, the stuff around Raymer. Yeah. That stuff's going to sell all day long. So I really like that. In terms of kind of other stuff, well, Mark Twain always says buy land, they're not making more of it, right? So buying land itself,
especially here in Kelowna.
Well, developable land, period, that is close to urban centers is going to have, especially with where the government is going, you're going to have the ability to develop it. And hopefully you have the ability to develop it sooner rather than later. So that's what I would be looking for as raw land at this point. And most of my developer clients, they're still proceeding to purchase and look for good raw land. Development has not stopped, thank God. Despite some high interest rates, I think it's just what we're looking at. What we have seen change is the speed of building. So the speed of incurring those additional costs has slowed down quite a bit because, of course, with interest rates, it's like now we have to be really mindful of carrying costs. So that's changing things a little bit. But yeah, so I would buy land, and I would definitely be looking for properties that have some densification potential.
Nice. What's the best thing you've ever spent any money on?
Great vacations. And from my perspective, you only have one trip around the sun, right? And investing in yourself has always been a good thing. So, one of the best things I ever did was got my offshore captain's license. So the ability to sail and, spend some quality time in the ocean.
Where do you go?
Wonderful. There's a great school in Bellingham, actually, San Juan Sailing. So that's just kind of almost amazing. Next door to us.
Yeah, no doubt.
What's your charity of choice? How do you give back?
Central Okanagan Foundation. I sat on their board of directors for years. They are absolutely fantastic. They can work with individual donors to set up specific funds, but they have a lot of different missions in town in terms of what they do and what they can accomplish. But the whole point of the foundation is we hold on to the principle of the funds and we deploy the interest each and every year because we want our influence to grow. And so it has been growing year after year after year. And it does lots of different things in this town for a lot of different people and really makes a real difference in the Okanagan. So I was proud to sit on their board of directors for years. And when I'm making a local donation, they are my first go-to.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And last question is, how can Taylor and I or our podcast or our listener help you?
Well, helping me, I think from my perspective, if you're looking for help, give me a call for sure. And I'll see if I'm the right person. If I'm not, I probably know the right person and I can direct you in that way. I'm lucky enough to be at the stage of my career where I get to kind of pick and choose what I do and who I do that with. And I'm very grateful for that. And I'm very grateful to have some amazing clients, some amazing partners, an amazing partner in life. And that's a good place to be.
Awesome. Well, it's been awesome talking to you. It was so fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, hopefully you don't send us a bill for this. You're probably the most expensive guest we've had on, so we'll...
That was 1 hour.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is some serious financial...
Yeah, the contract didn't go through them. Yeah. No, thank you so much. Appreciate your time, and look forward to having you back on.